Hello and welcome to KPMG's 10 Minutes of Tax. Today we're going to discuss some new VAT rules that will come into effect on the 1st of July 2021 and that will affect online sales of goods to consumers throughout the EU. My name is David Duffy and I'm a partner in KPMG in Ireland's Indirect Tax Group, and I'm joined today by John Curry, who's a principal in our Tax Transformation and Technology Group, and Joanne Gallagher, a director in our Indirect Tax Group. So turning to you, Joanne, first of all, I mentioned that these changes will affect online sales of goods throughout the EU. So if I'm an Irish seller with online sales, how will these changes impact me?
Thanks, David. Yes, I think there's some fundamental changes on the cards. Currently, an Irish retailer selling online to consumers in other EU member states charges Irish VAT on their sales until such time as they breach the distance selling threshold in the consumer's member state. However, from the 1st of July, the Irish retailer will instead be required to charge local VAT at the correct rate in the consumer's member state. So in practical terms, that means that the Irish retailer may go from having VAT accounting obligations in only one member state, Ireland, to having VAT accounting obligations in every member state where its customers are located. To ease the administrative burden on the retailer, all VAT on its cross-border sales to consumers in the EU can be reported through a one-stop shop VAT return. Now, this involves filing one quarterly return with Irish Revenue, and that'll have a breakdown of the VAT due on its sales in the other 26 member states as well as Northern Ireland. The one-stop shop return cannot be used to recover input VAT, however.
Thanks, Joanne. So, John, turning to you from a systems perspective, let's say our Irish retailer, what should they be thinking about from their systems in order to be ready for these changes?
Well, I think the good news, David, is that we're a retailer that's operating and selling into multiple jurisdictions. The compliance burden has been eased somewhat because the supplier now has the ability to file this foreign VAT essentially through their domestic return through the one-stop shop mechanism. So I think that's good news and eases the burden somewhat for businesses. I think there will be a need to ensure that there's sufficient data and information being captured from an audit trail perspective, because that is a requirement and that's maintained for 10 years. But I think the real challenge is going to be around the VAT rates, assigning the correct VAT rate in the jurisdiction that you're selling for that particular product. That I think is going to be the key area that businesses will be focusing on.
Absolutely. We all know some of the challenges and nuances there can be around VAT rates. So having to, I suppose, consider that on the scale of 26, 27 countries would be a significant task. So that deals with, I suppose, transactions within the EU. But Joanne, I understand there's also changes coming in for imported goods coming from outside the EU. Could you outline what the key changes are in respect of those transactions?
Yes, of course, David. I think in the context of imports, one of the key changes is the abolition of what's known as low value consignment relief for imports under 22 euros. And what this means is that from the 1st of July, these imports will be VATable regardless of their value, with VAT traditionally collected at the point of delivery to the customer. Now, as there will be a greater volume of VATable imports, the EU are introducing a second one-stop shop, and that's called the Import One-Stop Shop. Similar to the scheme that we mentioned earlier, VAT due on imports into other EU member states can be paid through a single VAT return. However, there are some key differences to bear in mind. The first of these is that the Import One-Stop Shop can only be used for imports with an intrinsic value of less than 150 euros, which are not subject to excise duty. And secondly, instead of quarterly returns, the Import One-Stop Shop return must be filed monthly.
Okay, John. So I guess businesses who are importing goods for consumers in the EU, there's additional complexity again. What would you see as being the key requirements, if you like, in for those transactions?
Look, David, it's about having the right data to be able to determine that VAT treatment, the data around the VAT rate that applies to the product, where the goods are being shipped from, where they're being shipped to. This little point around consignments versus individual packages. We know from a logistics perspective, sometimes these things are bundled. So I think the import one-stop shop, there will be more variables that will be needed to be recorded by businesses in order to make sure that they've got the correct VAT and are operating the scheme correctly.
Yeah, and I guess there's also a commercial point, which is that, well, businesses don't have to go into the import one-stop shop, but the advantage of doing so is that it allows VAT to be dealt with and them to sell a inclusive price rather than their customer having to pay more VAT at the point of delivery. So you can see why I suppose it would be an attractive proposition for businesses. But as you say, there are systems and data requirements to be managed. I guess maybe turning to the last of the key changes is in respect of online sales via platforms. And we know the significant impact online systems and marketplaces have. Joanne, what are the key changes that affecting online sellers via marketplaces?
Yeah, thanks, David. For online marketplaces and electronic interfaces, they will have additional VAT obligations in certain cases. And in particular, they will become a deemed supplier in two scenarios. Firstly, where they facilitate imports of goods valued below 150 euros for consumers. And secondly, if they facilitate intra-EU supplies of goods within the community by non-EU established sellers. I think these marketplace rules are going to bring added complexity for online retailers selling through multiple platforms as well as their own channels, as they may be liable for VAT in some cases and then again not in others.
Okay, John, and I guess turning to you, again, more complexity probably means more complexity from a systems perspective. What do you see again as being the key challenges in that scenario?
I think the key challenge, like at the end of the day now, the marketplace platform has to have full visibility on what the sellers are selling and how they are selling on their platforms. And in that area, absolutely, the shopper is important, but equally as important is the sellers and how the platforms interact with them. So I think it's about getting the balancing act right between getting all this information from the sellers in order to get a correct VAT position and a correct VAT determined at the time of sale.
The 1st of July is almost upon us. What would you say are the key takeaways for businesses in advance of the new rules coming into effect? So Joanne, I might ask you first of all.
Absolutely, David. Yeah, there's not long to go now. And I think traders operating in this space will need to quickly decide if they're impacted by the changes and where they are impacted, and they've made a decision to use one of the new one-stop shop schemes to remit their VAT, then they need to take immediate steps to register for the scheme through Revenue's online service, ROS.
Okay. And John, what would you say is your key takeaway at this point?
Look, changes to any IT or e-commerce system take time. So realistically, with the timeframes involved, we're probably in workaround territory. So how can we ensure that we've got the correct VAT numbers to report in the returns when they are due? And maybe that process could maybe inform us with regards to how we look to build a more robust or a more automated solution in order to try and address this longer term.
Perfect. And the only point I'd add is I think communication with your partners is going to be crucially important, because it's not just what happens on your website or the platform when you sell, but obviously your logistics partners in terms of is VAT due to be collected? Are they putting the correct one-stop shop number on the packages and so on will be crucially important. So that brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to thank John and Joanne for their input today. I'd like to thank you for listening. And if you do have any further queries, please feel free to contact any of us or your usual KPMG contact. Thank you.